3 million pages of evidence, thousands of unsealed flight logs, millions of data points, names, themes, and timelines connected. You are listening to the Epstein Files, the world's first AI-native investigation into the case that traditional journalism simply could not handle.
Welcome back to the Epstein Files.
It's good to be back.
So today, we are tackling a name that I think for many people is one of the most jarring in this entire web, Bill Gates.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Gates met with Jeffrey Epstein multiple times. And the crucial part, the part we really need to focus on, is that this happened after the conviction.
Right, after 2008.
The discussions, at least on the surface, were allegedly about philanthropy. So today, we're really going to examine the Gates connection. We'll look at the documented meetings, and, we're going to try to unpack the questions that still remain.
And there's so many. I mean, it's arguably the most puzzling and maybe the most consequential chapter in this whole network analysis we've been doing.
How so?
Well, you have a global icon of public health. I mean, a man whose name is literally synonymous with doing good on a global scale. And he's crossing paths with a man who is synonymous with the absolute worst kind of exploitation.
The incongruity, that's exactly it. That's the hook here, isn't it? It's just, It's so dissonant. We aren't talking about some shadowy figure in the background or, some desperate social climber trying to get a foothold. We're talking about one of the richest men in the history of the world.
A man who, you could argue, has access to anyone and everyone on the planet.
Exactly. He's dedicated the entire second half of his life to eradicating polio, to fixing global sanitation, to solving the climate crisis. These are Nobel-level goals.
Yeah.
And yet there he is. In the meeting schedules, in the flight logs, it just doesn't compute.
And, the stakes here are incredibly high because, as you mentioned, these weren't just accidental run-ins at a party.
No.
These were scheduled meetings. They took place when Jeffrey Epstein was already a complete pariah to what you and I would call polite society.
Yeah.
He was a convicted sex offender. He was registered. Everyone knew. And yet the doors to the world's elite, and specifically the doors to Bill Gates, somehow remained open.
Okay, so let's lay out a roadmap for everyone listening. We're going to try to unpack this systematically because you have to.
You have to be methodical.
First, we need to dig into the timeline. Specifically, as we've said, that post-conviction era. That is the crucial context for everything else.
It is. It's the differentiator that changes this from, a simple social acquaintance to something much more troubling.
Right. Then we're going to look at the justification, the why, the story that's been put out there about discussions surrounding philanthropy and the Gates Foundation.
The official narrative, so to speak.
Exactly. And we'll look at the specific mentions of Gates and also Microsoft in those Ghislaine-Maxwell interview transcripts and the DOJ files that have been released.
And those files are, they're dense. They are not an easy read, but they reveal a lot about the social landscape they were all operating in.
And finally, we have to talk about the fallout, the real-world consequences, personal, public. We're talking about the divorce, the public expressions of regret. It's a lot.
It's a very heavy dossier for today.
It really is. So let's dive in. I want to start with the hard evidence because that's where you have to begin. We have this massive cache of documents, this database from the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
The sheer volume of data released is, it's overwhelming. But if you know where to look and if you know what search terms to use, patterns do start to emerge.
That's the key with these big data dumps, isn't it? It's not about reading one document in isolation. It's about cross-referencing thousands of pages to find that connective tissue.
So we used the pinpoint database analysis, and we specifically ran a query for Gates. And, some really interesting hits came back.
Okay.
Let's start with a document that's labeled as a redacted interview transcript with Ghislaine-Maxwell. We have one from July 25th, 2025, and another from the day before.
Right. So for everyone listening, these are transcripts of Maxwell being questioned during the legal proceedings. And what's fascinating here is the context in which Bill Gates' name even comes up. It isn't always in relation to a crime. Sometimes it's just used as this benchmark for time and for status.
Can you give us an example? Because when I was reading through these, one specific phrase just completely jumped off the page at me.
Sure. There's a section in the transcript where Ghislaine-Maxwell is discussing her timeline. She's essentially trying to establish when she knew certain people or when she was active in certain circles. And she uses this phrase. She says it was before Apple or Microsoft.
Before Apple or Microsoft, I mean, that's a very specific cultural marker. It feels heavy with meaning. It's not just a date.
It's not. It's a power statement. It implies a long-standing social proximity to that world. She isn't referencing the companies as, thing you buy products from.
Yeah.
She's referencing them as entire eras of wealth and influence.
Yeah.
What she's really saying is, I was around before these tech giants became the masters of the universe.
It frames her, and by extension Epstein, as being part of that elite fabric for a very, very long time. It's almost a flex, isn't it? It's like she's saying, we were here first.
Precisely. It's a status signal.
Huh.
It suggests that she views herself and Epstein not as, groupies of the tech elite, but as peers, as contemporary.
Wait.
And then in the transcript from the day prior to that one, the specific testimony about whether she actually met Bill Gates. The question is asked directly to her. Did you meet Bill Gates over the years?
And what was her response? In the fragments we have, what does she say?
Well, the transcript fragments we can see reference a tech conference. She mentioned speaking at a tech conference herself. And then the question appears, do you know whether Mr. Gates, followed by a discussion of these kinds of high-profile events?
This connects to something we also see in another document, the Day 1, Part 6 transcript. This idea of the tech conference connection keeps popping up.
It does.
It really paints a picture of where these two worlds, Gates's world and Epstein's world, would have intersected.
Yes. And we have to remember the ecosystem these people lived in. It's not like our world. These are high-level, elite networking events. TED Talks, Aspen Ideas Festival, that sort of thing. These weren't just boring business meetings. They were gatherings of the so-called intelligentsia.
Right.
So you have billionaire philanthropists like Gates, and then you have people like Epstein who are desperately trying to brand themselves as science financiers.
The science philanthropist branding. Yeah, we'll definitely need to get into that more, but it explains why they'd even be in the same room. It wasn't about banking or finance, not in the traditional sense. It was about ideas, or at least the appearance of being interested in big ideas.
Exactly. So when Maxwell mentions knowing people before Microsoft, or when she references these tech conferences, she's establishing that their worlds overlap naturally. They were all swimming in the same very small, very chlorinated pond of ultra-wealthy individuals interested in the future of technology and science.
Now, I want to clarify something for our listeners, because it's really important. When you search a database like the DOJ files for a common name like Gates, you get a lot of noise. It is not all smoking guns.
Oh, absolutely. You have to be so careful with keyword searches. Context is everything. You can go down 100 rabbit holes that lead nowhere.
Right. For example, we found a document, a PDF, that mentions a company called Harbor Gates Capital LLC. And when you first see that, your brain immediately goes, wait, is this a shell company? Is this a direct link?
Yes, your alarm bells go off.
Yeah.
And this is where we have to be incredibly precise as investigators. We looked into it. Harbor Gates Capital LLC lists a Bill Sigliano as its chairman.
So that is not the Bill Gates.
No, it's a classic false positive. And it's so important to distinguish between the man himself and other entities that just happen to share the name. We have to be disciplined here.
But I think it's worth noting the fact that these searches even appear in the DOJ cache shows how thorough the investigation documents are. They sucked in everything.
Everything with that keyword. But the Maxwell testimony, that is different. That's direct. That's her being asked on the record about the man himself. That's not a false positive.
Okay, so let's unpack this timeline a little bit more then. We've established that, okay, they ran in the same circles, they might have been at the same conferences. But the real controversy here isn't about them bumping into each other at a TED Talk in 1999.
No, that happens.
Right. The controversy is about the documented meetings that happened much, much later.
The post-2008 era. That is the critical window. Everything hinges on that date.
So explain for us, why is that date so critically important?
Because in 2008, Jeffrey Epstein was convicted. He pleaded guilty to soliciting prostitution from a minor in Florida. He registered as a sex offender. The veil was, for all intents and purposes, lifted.
There was no more plausible deniability.
None. Before 2008, you can argue, weakly perhaps, but you can still argue, that he was just this eccentric financier with some nasty rumors swirling around him. After 2008, he was a known quantity, a criminal, a documented predator.
And yet, this seems to be when the relationship, or at least the meetings, really pick up steam. Which brings us back to that central question, why? Why would Bill Gates, a man who has access to literally anyone on the planet, presidents, kings, popes, why would he take a meeting with Jeffrey Epstein after 2008?
And this is the why. This is the core of the whole issue. And to even begin to understand it, I think we have to look at philanthropy as the Trojan horse.
The cover of charity? It sounds so cynical to say it, but that really seems to be the mechanism here.
Exactly. I mean, if we look at sources from that era, like the HBR IdeaCast interview, Bill Gates on how business leaders can fight climate change, you get a real glimpse into Gates's mindset at the time.
He was, and he still is, obsessed with results. He's an engineer at heart. He sees a problem. He wants to find the most efficient solution.
Completely obsessed. He talks about aggressive action. He talks about the need for massive breakthroughs. In another source from the Liberty Roundtable, there's discussion about his focus on things like needleless vaccinations and huge paradigm-shifting steps to stop infectious diseases. He's looking for the magic bullet.
So his brain is fully 100% occupied with these massive global engineering problems. Eradicating disease, fixing the climate. He's looking for efficiency. He wants to save lives, and he wants to do it at an unprecedented scale.
Correct. And into this picture, into this world of massive problems needing massive solutions, steps Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Epstein didn't pitch himself to Gates as a pimp or a socialite.
Better not. That would never have worked.
Never. He pitched himself as a science philanthropist.
He spoke the language. He knew the jargon. He could talk the talk.
He courted Nobel-winning scientists. He courted university presidents. He courted funders. He positioned himself not as someone with money, necessarily, but as a gateway to other people's money.
A connector. Yeah. A networker.
Yes. And the theory, which is supported by various reports and just the context of these meetings, is that Epstein presented himself to Gates as someone who could unlock vast, unimaginable amounts of funding for these global health initiatives. He was selling access.
And there's even reporting, and you can see hints of this ambition in the background of a lot of the source material, that Epstein specifically pitched himself as someone who could help secure a Nobel Peace Prize for Gates.
Which is the ultimate validation for a philanthropist, isn't it? If you're Bill Gates, you've already conquered the business world. You've built one of the biggest companies in history. Now you're trying to conquer the world of humanitarian aid. The Nobel Prize is the final capstone. It's the one thing your money can't strictly buy.
That is incredibly seductive, even for a billionaire who seemingly has everything.
It's extremely seductive. And Epstein was, by all accounts, a master manipulator. He knew what people wanted. He knew Gates wanted to solve these huge problems, and he presented himself as the key to a very specific lock. Whether that lock was funding from sovereign wealth funds or connections to other high net worth individuals who were maybe hesitant to donate through traditional channels.
So it's almost like Epstein was playing the role of a specialized investment banker, but for charity.
Well,
I can get you the trillions you need to fix the climate.
Exactly. And because the goal saving the world was so noble, so unimpeachable, perhaps it made it easier for someone like Gates to ignore the messenger.
The ends justify the means.
Potentially. Now, there's another really important element here that provides cover for these meetings, and that's the academic connection.
Right. This isn't happening in a vacuum.
No, not at all. We have a source from the Tech Meme Ride Home podcast, and it discusses the scandal at the MIT Media Lab.
And this is crucial context, I think. You can't just view Gates's interactions in isolation. At the time, the MIT Media Lab founder made a public statement that taking Jeffrey Epstein's money was justified.
Justified. I mean, that is such a strong word coming from the leader of a major academic institution.
It's shocking, but it reflects the atmosphere of the time in those very specific elite academic and fundraising circles. Gates and the MIT Media Lab, they were moving in the same orbit. They were both trying to raise huge sums of money for high-concept science.
So if MIT, one of the most prestigious scientific institutions on the entire planet, is on the record saying it's okay to take his money, it's for a good cause, it's for science, that creates a kind of permission structure, doesn't it?
100%. It provides a safe space, intellectually and morally, for these meetings to happen. It wasn't Bill Gates meeting Jeffrey Epstein in some dark alley.
No.
It was Bill Gates meeting a man who was at the same time being courted by and donating to MIT. It normalizes the interaction. It gives it a veneer of legitimacy.
The irony is just.
Yeah.
It's blinding.
It's tragic.
It really is. You have the pursuit of these unimpeachably good causes, science, health, climate, and that very pursuit leads to the legitimization of a predator.
That's the Trojan horse. Epstein used the nobility of the cause to mask the depravity of the man.
And people like Gates, who were so laser-focused on that aggressive action needed to solve these problems, perhaps they chose not to look too closely at the person holding the checkbook, or, more accurately, the person claiming to hold the keys to the checkbook.
Or they truly thought the ends justified the means. If we cure polio, does it really matter who helped write the check?
which is a classic and very dangerous ethical trap. And as we see with the fallout, it backfired spectacularly.
Okay, let's pivot to that fallout, because eventually the cover is blown, the science philanthropist mask falls off, and we're left with the horrifying reality of who Epstein was. And for Bill Gates, this wasn't just a PR blip. This had real, tangible, life-altering consequences.
It absolutely did. It impacted his private life in the most profound way possible.
We have a source from the Daily Beast cheat sheet dated July 13th, 2021. The headline itself is pretty telling. Bill Gates is shaken up by his divorce.
And we have to connect the dots here. Reports surfaced and have been widely discussed in the context of their separation that Melinda French Gates was deeply, deeply uncomfortable with Bill's relationship with Epstein.
So this wasn't something that she found out about in the news years later. This wasn't a secret to her.
No, not at all. The reporting suggests that these meetings were a known point of contention within the marriage. And when you analyze the timing, the public announcement of the divorce, and the renewed public scrutiny of the Epstein ties, they happen in very close proximity. The meetings were in the past, but the public revelation of them brought all of that tension right back into the limelight.
And this brings us to the regret phase. We've all seen the interviews. Gates has publicly stated that meeting Epstein was a huge mistake and an error in judgment.
Let's just pause and analyze that language for a second. Error in judgment. Huge mistake.
It sounds clinical. It sounds like a statement that was vetted by a team of lawyers and PR experts.
It's very strategic language.
Sure.
He's trying to frame the interaction as purely transactional. He's saying, I made a bad business decision. I hope to get money for philanthropy, and I was wrong. He is trying very hard to distance himself from any narrative of friendship.
He wants the world to see it as a business calculation that went wrong, not a social bond.
Exactly. But the flight logs, the reports of multiple meetings, the fact that he went to Epstein's townhouse, that all muddies that water quite a bit.
It really does. And that's why the public perception shift was so severe. It's very hard to claim this was a purely business relationship when you're flying to Palm Beach on his private jet.
Right.
We have a clip from a show called Silent War from October of 2022. And it discusses how the Gates-Epstein connection basically threw gasoline on the fire of so-called conspiracy narratives.
Oh, it was the ultimate fuel. You have Bill Gates, who was already a target for a whole host of theories regarding vaccines and global health initiatives. And then you hand his detractors a legitimate, documented link to Jeffrey Epstein.
The source clip mentions Gates making these ominous predictions about civil war and hung elections.
Right. And you have to understand, when you associate with the ultimate symbol of deep state corruption, which is what Epstein became in the public imagination, you lose your credibility as a neutral public health figure. It doesn't matter what your intentions were.
Suddenly, you're not just the guy from Microsoft who's trying to cure polio. You're the guy who hung out with the convicted child trafficker.
Exactly. The association is toxic, and it taints everything else. And the DOJ file releases, the redactions, the stories about deleted files, all of that just fuels this deep-seated mistrust. The public sees a blacked-out line in a document, and they assume the absolute worst. They assume a cover-up.
It damages the trust in the very institutions he represents.
It does. It casts this long shadow over the Gates Foundation, over the global health initiatives, because people start to ask, if your judgment was this bad regarding Jeffrey Epstein, how can we trust your judgment on global health policy?
That is a fair question. It's a devastating question for someone in his position.
It's a question that Bill Gates has had to answer, or try to answer, repeatedly ever since.
Let's talk about those flight logs for a minute, because Epstein Air, the Lolita Express, is the smoking gun for so many people. It's the ultimate symbol of the abuse and the network.
It is the ledger of complicity in the public mind. If you were on that plane, you were in his world.
We have a source, What Vanished with Epstein, from Pat Gray Unleashed, and they discuss the big celebrity names on the flight logs.
And again, we need to be very precise here. Did Bill Gates fly on that plane?
Yes. The records show he did.
Yes. It is documented. There's a trip from New Jersey to Palm Beach in 2013.
So how does his presence on those logs compare to others? I mean, we see names like Bill Clinton and Donald Trump appearing in the pinpoint search filters as well. Their names are in the mix.
Well, the frequency is different. Based on the publicly available logs, Gates wasn't a frequent flyer in the same way some other individuals were alleged to be.
Yeah.
But the specific nature of that flight entry is still incredibly important.
How so?
Because again, it was framed around the foundation's work. The official explanation was that he was on his way to Florida for foundation business. But when you were on that plane, flying to Palm Beach, The line between business and personal completely dissolves. You were in a pressurized tube with this man. You were accepting his hospitality, his generosity.
In Palm Beach, that isn't a neutral location. That's not a conference room at MIT. That is Epstein's home turf. That was his base of operations.
Exactly. Getting on the plane and flying to his home implies a level of comfort, a level of familiarity that goes beyond a simple business acquaintance. You don't get on a private jet with someone you strictly view as a transactional contact unless there's a significant level of trust.
And that's the visual that sticks in people's minds. Bill Gates on that plane.
It's indelible. It's a powerful image.
I want to bring in one last connection that we found in the evidence files, the Microsoft connection.
Right, the Paul Allen context.
Yes. We have a source from the CNN Money Archive where Paul Allen is sharing his ideas. Now, we have to be extremely clear, Paul Allen is not implicated in the Epstein files.
No, he is not. And let's repeat that. We are not casting any aspersions on Paul Allen whatsoever.
But the word Microsoft as an entity appears repeatedly in the DOJ keyword searches, particularly in those Ghislaine Maxwell transcripts that we talked about at the top of the show.
And it goes right back to that idea of it being a cultural marker. Microsoft was the titan of that era. Allen and Gates built an absolute empire. They changed the world.
And for Ghislaine Maxwell, referencing that brand before Apple or Microsoft, it just shows how central Bill Gates' identity was to the world that she and Epstein lived in.
It shows that Gates wasn't just a person to them. He was an institution. He represented the absolute pinnacle of legitimate mainstream success. And for someone like Epstein, who was a fraud in so many fundamental ways, being seen with the pinnacle of legitimacy, that was the ultimate camouflage.
It validates him. If I'm with the guy who created Microsoft, I must be a serious person.
Exactly. It was identity laundering. Epstein was using Bill Gates' pristine reputation to clean his own filthy one.
And in the process, he stained Gates' reputation permanently.
That is the tragedy of the exchange. Gates thought he was getting access to funding for global health. Epstein was getting social currency and legitimacy. In the end, Epstein got the better deal.
So when we step back and look at all of it, the timeline, the philanthropy excuse, the transcripts, the fallout, what does it all mean?
To me, it paints a picture of hubris. Yes. The hubris of believing that you are so smart, so important, so focused on a noble goal that you can dance with the devil to do God's work and not get burned. Gates thought he could extract resources from Epstein for his causes without being tainted by Epstein's crimes. He was wrong.
And those DOJ files with those cold, dry transcripts of Maxwell being asked about Bill Gates, they just confirmed that he wasn't some random person. He was a known quantity in that dark inner circle.
He was a prize, a trophy friend, a shield of legitimacy. And the consequences of allowing himself to become that trophy are still playing out today for him and for the causes he cares about.
It's a sobering lesson, I think, on the company you keep, no matter who you are.
Indeed. No one is immune to bad judgment.
So to recap what we've really established today, Bill Gates met with Jeffrey Epstein multiple times after the 2008 conviction. That is a documented fact.
The motivation, at least the public one, appears to have been routed through philanthropy and the Gates Foundation's ambitious goals, specifically involving global health and science funding.
But the consequences were severe. They were a contributing factor in the dissolution of his marriage and have left a permanent blemish on his public record and his legacy.
And the DOJ files confirm that Ghislaine Maxwell was well aware of Gates and his status within their social and tech hierarchy. He was a target for them.
The evidence is there. The connections are documented. The judgment, I suppose, is up to history.
A very complicated piece of that history.
Next time, we turn our attention to the modeling industry. MC2, Jean-Luc Brunel's network, industry complicity, and Brunel's death in a Paris prison.
That is going to be a very dark one.
That's next time on the Epstein Files.
You have just heard an analysis of the official record. Every claim, name, and date mentioned in this episode is backed by primary source documents. You can view the original files for yourself at epsteinfiles.fm. If you value this data-first approach to journalism, please leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. It helps keep this investigation visible. We'll see you in the next file.